In the last episode, we saw film evolve significantly in just 10 years, and today we'll be looking at two more silent film versions of A Christmas Carol. It's one of the most influential books ever written. Even if you've never read Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, you are familiar with it. My name is Colin Murr, and I've loved this story for as long as I can remember. I'm going to be looking at every film and TV adaptation of A Christmas Carol I can, because I love the story that much. This is Scrooge, A Christmas Carol podcast. The Silent Christmas Carols, 1913 to 1914. The first of these comes from 1913, and when you look at the cast list, you'll notice that we have ourselves another repeat Scrooge. It's a bit now, just go with it. We've had enough repeat Scrooges, so it's a bit. So far, we've had Basil Rathbone, Alistair Sim, Ron Hadrick, and, if you want to count him, Scrooge McDuck. And now we can add Seymour Hicks to our list, too. As I mentioned in the last episode, Hicks had already made a name for himself playing Scrooge in a popular one-act play on stage, so it made perfect sense that he'd be cast in an early film version. Like some early versions, this film was released under multiple titles. In 1913, it was released as simply Scrooge. However, it was then released in 1926 in the US under the title Old Scrooge, even though Hicks was younger here than the other time he would play Scrooge in 1935. Thankfully, it's not a young Sheldon situation. Also, like some early versions, and weirdly, some later ones, a lot of the actors aren't credited here. We know it's Hicks's Scrooge, and that's really it. If you've never seen a silent film and have only seen the parodies, you probably expect that they have muted scenes of people talking, followed by long, over-explanatory intertitles. However, when you start watching the silent classics, you realize this isn't the case at all, and the great silent films are almost entirely visual, wordless experiences with just the words you need to move it along. Then you watch the bad ones and realize a lot of silent films were that way after all. Scrooge 1913 is 40 minutes long, but don't get your hopes up. A whole lot of that is intertitles. It's very much in the vein of the stage-inspired versions we've seen so far. However, this one starts a little bit differently, giving the viewer a brief introduction to Charles Dickens and why he wrote the book. We then get a bit of a stranger choice. We get an introduction to Scrooge, which is mostly done by intertitles in the present tense. It uses a lot of the text that Dickens used to describe Scrooge at the beginning of the book, but it's a little surreal seeing it in the present tense. What's strange is they could have done this all with very limited titles. Plenty of sound versions will introduce Scrooge walking down the street with little to no dialogue. People avoid him, children hate him, he's bitter and cold. It's not that hard to set up. Seymour Hicks brings a similar physicality to the role that he would in the 1935 film. His Scrooge is disheveled, lonely, and pathetic. While most Scrooges are obviously this way underneath the surface, many hide it under a layer of intimidation or pride. I don't think one way over another is truer to the text, as there's plenty left up to the reader's interpretation. George C. Scott and Michael Caine played imposing Scrooges who enjoyed making people uncomfortable and even laughed at their own jokes. Hicks's Scrooge has none of these delusions about himself, and he seems like the kind of person that a lot of folks genuinely wouldn't pay any mind to at all. The Alistair Sim Scrooge, for what it's worth, is somewhere in the middle of these two. Over the years, I have come to appreciate Hicks' take on the character in the 1935 film, and there is a good bit of that here, too. Of course, being a silent film, his performance is going to be over the top, but it's easy to see that this was a character he was comfortable playing. The pacing of this film, as I've alluded to, is strange. It takes so long to get to the introduction of Marley's ghost, which is especially odd because the scenes leading up to that, the charity workers, Fred, other scenes with Bob Cratchit, rely almost solely on dialogue. Hope you like intertitles. We get the scene with Fred and the charity worker scene. I talked last time about the 1901 J.C. Buckstone one act play that had become enormously popular. And from what I can tell, this film takes a lot from it. For example, there's only one charity worker here. However, when we get another person who comes to visit Scrooge, a woman who's poor and in need of money. Scrooge, of course, rejects her. The scene has exactly the same message as the charity worker scene, so I don't know why both of these scenes exist alongside each other. It's particularly strange because the poor woman shows up before the charity workers, so audiences in the know are likely to think they're doing a new spin on that scene. It only makes things more confusing when the charity worker, called a guardian of the poor in the intertitle, shows up. I'm all for additional scenes that hammer home the message of the film. Think of that scene in 1984 when they see the poor family under the bridge in Christmas Present. Great, add something new, well acted. A lot of versions cut out or greatly reduce the poverty that inspired Dickens to write the book. So, like I said, all for it, but it's literally just the same scene twice. I don't get it. It's after this, though, that we really start to see the influence of that 1901 Buckstone play. Scrooge lives in his counting house here, just like in the play. Also, like in the play, Marley's the one who shows him the visions instead of the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future. Since Marley is the only one showing the visions, everything here happens on Christmas Eve. When Scrooge is done with the visions, it's still dark outside. Again, the 40-minute runtime may sound promising at first, but Marley doesn't show up until more than halfway through, because so much of that time is spent on reading. Some of the word choice on the title cards is odd as well. For example, Marley tells Scrooge, I will show you yourself as a solitary, neglected, selfish boy at school. Solitary and neglected, sure, absolutely, but selfish. He wasn't choosing to spend Christmases alone at school. Perhaps they meant something more like self-involved, which still wouldn't be right, but like he was just all by himself and someone got a word wrong. I don't know. Later, Marley describes, quote, your sister, whom you abandoned later in life. Now, obviously, we don't know much about Fan's adulthood in the book, except that she had a child and died. But this is an odd statement since it's just mentioned and not elaborated on. It's not like the audience is going to be like, oh, yes, that familiar plot point, Scrooge abandoning Fan in adulthood. Hicks's reaction to these visions is understandably quite over the top. Clearly, the actor was just filming against nothing and being told to react. He is going all in, I'll give him that, in both this and the 1935 film. He never goes halfway on anything. He really goes all in on playing Scrooge. And like I said, you can really tell this is a character he's been playing so many times. He played Scrooge hundreds of times on stage. And yeah, especially in that 1935 film it shows. It's a lot like the previous films we've seen, where the visions are projected on Scrooge's wall. Mostly, this is the least interesting aspect about these early ones. They all start to run together when things are being presented in the same manner. It's all the scenes you'd expect, and there aren't too many twists on the source material. Like I said, most interesting part, by far, Seymour Hicks. What's particularly strange here is just how little focus they give the ghosts. From the time Marley shows up to the time Scrooge wakes up is fewer than 10 minutes, less than a quarter of the film. Giving such a long introduction and a fairly long, well, it's not really Christmas morning here, but post ghost scenes feels odd when the ghost portion is so rushed. I'm trying to think of another version where the ghosts take up so little of the story. The Bugs Bunny version does, I guess, but that barely counts. It's a 7-minute cartoon. There was a Lionel Barrymore radio version late in his run of playing Scrooge that spent a fair bit of time setting up the story and then rushed through the ghosts. However, in terms of straight adaptations on film, I don't think there's another one that I've seen that spends a lower percentage of its time on the ghost. Again, 25% of the film on not just the three ghosts, but all four, including Marley. And oh, just for those wondering, that percentage I'm counting of the whole film, the 10 minutes, that includes the titles that show during those 10 minutes. That's the whole titles and filmed scenes is all in that 10-minute period. There are some weird things when Scrooge wakes up as well. He already knows it's still Christmas, which I guess makes sense because Marley showed him all the visions. And there wasn't any of the first ghost when the clock strikes one stuff. However, he still talks to the boy on the street and asks if Tiny Tim is okay. He also has the boy buy a turkey, like in the book. I mean, I suppose early on they established Scrooge is familiar with the children who live near the counting house, albeit not positively. So he could be aware that this child knows Tiny Tim, but it's a little odd. Scrooge also then goes to the Cratchits for Christmas dinner. In his imagination, we see the scene play out, but he's just imagining it. It's very interesting. On the day after, we get that fake out from the book when Scrooge pretends to be angry with Bob Cratchit. I guess the film just wanted to have its cake and eat it too here. It's weird to have the happy scene with the Cratchit family if it won't actually be the ending. I do wonder if they just shot both as potential endings and just worked them both into the film. In the same way that the poor woman and the charity worker are two versions of the same scene, this is two versions of an ending. Are we just watching every scene they filmed for this? They were going to cut it down. Ultimately, this is the least interesting silent version I've covered yet. That's weird because it is the most complete. It's interesting for Seymour Hicks, who, again, does a good job despite its limitations. When he's doing that big silent movie acting, it's a lot. But those smaller moments at the beginning, we see him completely embody Scrooge with that really great, believable old man physicality. Really strong. Want even more Scrooge, A Christmas Carol podcast? Just go to my Patreon at patreon.com/Scrooge, A Christmas Carol podcast, where for just $5 a month, you can get a bonus episode every month of the year. There, I cover various TV shows versions of A Christmas Carol. For $10 a month, you can even vote on what episode I do next. Additionally, for just $1 a month, you can get all episodes 24 hours early. Again, just go to patreon.com/Scrooge A Christmas Carol podcast or follow the link in the description. Okay, we're going to move just 1 year into the future for the 1914 film A Christmas Carol. Yeah, even then they would rotate between calling them Scrooge and A Christmas Carol. One thing you'll notice here is that the existing quality of the film print is so much better. The best print of this still looks great today, all things considered. It's day and night. Even though it was made just a year later, this one feels so far ahead of the 1913 film. Plus, there's good news for me as the writer of this, since the intertitles introduce the actors as they enter the scene. Charles Rock plays Scrooge here, and once again, we're seeing a contrast between the internal and the external portrayals of Scrooge's anger and bitterness. When an actor approaches it internally, we see a lot of loneliness, inner sadness, exhaustion. Scrooge hates the world and he's just done with it. You can see a lot of this in the portrayals from Seymour Hicks, Alistair Sim, and George C. Scott. When an actor externalizes their performance, it leads to anger, loud arguments, and bluster. You can see this in the portrayals from Reginald Owen, Basil Rathbone, and Bill Murray and Scrooge, especially. I make it no secret which I prefer, and unfortunately, Rock does fall into the latter category here. Sure, it's a 1914 silent film, but I do feel like I'm at the point where we can stop viewing these as mere experiments and more as films. In this film, Scrooge actually walks with the ghosts to the various visions, which is quite a step forward. However, I just don't feel that Rock is inhabiting the character in the way Hicks did. What is it with Seymour Hicks versions always being followed by a disappointing over the top performance? When Fred comes into the picture, played by Franklin Bellamy, he's joined by his wife, played by Edna Flugrath. You're going to love the names in this movie. Since this apparently also happened in the lost 1908 film, I have to wonder if Fred and his wife walking in together was a change from the Buckstone play. It's by no means a major twist in the source material or anything, but it's interesting that it happened twice in a few years. There's also an impressive shot when we see Scrooge shooing away the singing children. It cuts between the children outside the window and Scrooge on the inside, and they were clearly shot on the same set. It's not just awkward editing. Editing, filmmaking, set design, all of it has come such a long way by this point in film history, even though it's only been 13 years since our first Christmas Carol. We get a short scene of Scrooge eating dinner in a tavern, showing that he's making everyone's Christmas Eve just a little bit worse by being there. He also turns away a poor woman on the street, which is a much better touch than having another character walk into his office and have a conversation. Marley's face in the door knocker looks the most impressive it has yet, and it feels like Scrooge is genuinely reacting in terror to it. Once Scrooge walks inside, there is also some considerable build-up to Marley here. There's also a really amusing bit when Marley appears. Unlike a lot of primary actors in this, Marley's not credited, perhaps to retain the mystery a la 1931's Frankenstein. Usually, ringing bells announce Marley's appearance, but here, Marley walks into Scrooge's house and physically rings his bell. Either this is a Zucker Brothers level joke, or it was a practical decision from a stage version that the director didn't actually realize was a practical decision. But putting this in a silent film where no one can hear the bell ringing, gotta be a gag, right? This is really the first time that it feels like they're making a film of A Christmas Carol. Obviously, it's very much of its time, but there's no doubt we've crossed a line here. This is even more obvious when the ghosts start appearing and Scrooge is taken to the visions in person instead of seeing them projected on a screen. He's still somewhat transparent, so Charles Rock and the various ghost actors were likely just projected into the scenes, but it at least is starting to feel like they are there. Fezziwig's party feels lively and real for once. The uncredited actor playing Fezziwig has the same look as so many actors who would go on to play the part. I think particularly of Ian McNeice in the Patrick Stewart version, 85 years apart from this, but they have the same look for Fezziwig. And even though this is only one of two scenes of Scrooge's past, it's effective. The only other past scene is Scrooge at school, meaning a lot's left out here. If you're curious why I won't use IMDb for my crediting, you'll note that they credit Edna Flugrath as Belle, a character who doesn't appear in the film. The Ghost of Christmas Present, played by Wyndham Guys, great names in this movie all around, shows Scrooge a bit of Fred's party and of the Cratchit family Christmas. However, here it's Fred whose toast to Scrooge is rejected, not Bob Cratchit's. Cratchit's genuinely drinks to Scrooge here. As you'll recall, this apparently happened in that lost 1908 film, too. Was this also something that happened in a play? I know I suggest this anytime something happens twice, but I have to wonder. Of course, these instances could just be copying something they saw in a different film. Continuing our fantastic cast list, well, their names at least, we have Ashton Tonge as the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come. It's just a tombstone here, though. He gets Scrooge out of bed, takes him to the graveyard, walks him back to bed. Scrooge doesn't even then wake up in bed. They just walk him right back to bed. It must have been a weird walk as they walked back from the graveyard into the bed. This could have been a telegram energy. A strange choice is made on Christmas morning when Scrooge says that the turkey for the Cratchits is from him, because he then tries to fool Bob the next morning too. How does this work? I mean, yes, it might confuse him if he walks in expecting Scrooge to be nice, but he doesn't. He walks in nervous because he's late and he's working for Scrooge. I know it's not that big of a deal. It's just odd that he says, "Tell them it's for me." And then when Cratchit walks in the next day, he tries to pull one over on him. So, like I said, we have definitely turned a page here. We're now into the realm of actual films, not just experiments. We've still got two more to cover, unless more get discovered in the time before I get to them. So we're going to save those two for the third and, for now, final episode of this little mini series of the Silent Christmas Carols. But yeah, I figured we could do two here, three the last time, and then two on the final episode. So I will talk a little more about these. I don't think I have too much more to say on these, but I'll talk a little more about the Silent Christmas Carols with some personal thoughts. Thank you for listening to Scrooge, a Christmas Carol podcast. So yeah, that is the second episode on the Silent Carols, and you could tell with the Seymour Hicks one here why I didn't want to start with these. I felt like I'd be repeating myself a lot, and I still feel like I might be, but it's okay because I feel I have more context now to talk about these in. Again, starting with primitive experiments and versions that are really doing the same thing over and over would not be a great place to start. And also, you're just not going to build an audience starting with Hey, my first episodes in this film from 1901. I mean, the episodes I started with were obscure enough, but no, I think you really got to start with those first two sound films because 1935, 1938 came out in a few years of each other, and they're night and day. Not perfect, neither one's perfect, but they show the two directions in which versions often go. The very light and kind of over the top portrayal of Scrooge, all kind of cartoony and heightened, and the much more serious minded approach of the 1935 film. I think they both point the way forward into how adaptations would go. Obviously, the 1951 film changed everything. But yeah, those first two, I think that's really the beginning of the legacy. Again, I said that when I did the episode, that's where it started. But yeah, it's interesting to go back and look at these silent versions to see maybe a few things that could have influenced later portrayals. Obviously, I think seeing Seymour Hicks here really helps you tap into why he's so good in that 1935 film. Uh, I actually was harder on his performance in the original episode than I might be even now. I've come around to that film even more in the year plus since I recorded that episode. It's still got a lot of problems, but I really have come to like his performance because I see it as more intentional. And I think I was judging a lot of it of, oh, he's clearly slipping a little bit. But no, it was all very much character choices. And I said that then, but I think even more I've come to appreciate just how lived in his Scrooge is. And I really like his portrayal of the character in spite of my issues with the storytelling in that movie. It's such a different kind of Scrooge, of this kind of person who he's just a non-entity in the world. Again, I don't think you take a look at that, you take a look at the like vastly different portrayal by George C. Scott. Two performers who do a great job, both entirely different takes on the character. And who's to say if one's right, one's wrong? I think they're both right. I think they're both right for the actors who are playing it. I think you could read Scrooge either way from the book. One who he makes himself known and people do not care for him. I mean, that's not wrong. He's very disliked in the book, obviously, when you get to the ending. But the fact that he's almost a non-entity in the Seymour Hicks film when he's kind of this slight, messy man, physically, like he just doesn't comb his hair. Like, yeah, it's just a different take on the character than so many of the versions that came later. And we get that in the Seymour Hicks version here from 1913. He brings that to those opening scenes, and it becomes a silent movie performance when he's reacting. When he's doing those opening scenes with Cratchit and the charity workers, obviously way too much dialogue, but it's a pretty subtle performance for what this is. It just he feels very genuine. And so much silent film is not that. It's often very pantomime, right? So it's really naturalistic for what it is. And he nails it. I mean, again, it's so good we have a sound version with it because he was such an iconic Scrooge on stage. And obviously none of that remains. So I'm glad we have the 1935 film as a legacy to that. But yeah, the 1913 film, you're only going to watch it out of interest. This is honestly one of the reasons I wasn't interested in covering silent movies early on because it's so boring. There's so many intertitles, title cards, so many words. It goes on and on and on. Uh, I have no idea why they bothered making this, honestly. 1914 one is so much better. And it's not great. Again, the actor playing Scrooge, I don't think is great. It's very much the kind of pantomime performance I was talking about. But it's just a better made film. But just seeing the children outside the office and Scrooge inside the office and two parts of a shot, like that's not major filmmaking, obviously, but at this point in film, it was just to see people outside a window and you see both sides of it. Yeah, it's interesting if you're fascinated by that part of film history. I'm not someone who's studied silent film. Usually, if I've seen silent movies outside of this project, they're silent horror films. But I think horror can be very visceral and visual when you don't need dialogue. So some silent horror still lands Nosferatu, uh, Exon, Caligari, obviously, uh, the Phantom Carriage, things like that. So I have, Faust from Murnau. There's some really good ones, obviously, but for the most part, people aren't gonna be watching these silent Christmas carols outside of people doing what I'm doing here. And I think if you watch what I put in these videos, you'll get the idea of what it is. Yeah, that was two more, and I've got two more coming. So check out, watch out for those. I'm gonna do those next month. I'm gonna just do this as a three-piece series, 3 months in a row. I have some other ideas for things down the road, but I'm just gonna full speed ahead into the Silent Carols right now. We're gonna do next month, March. We'll do the third Silent Carols video. We got two more to cover, two from the 20s. So going right through. And then I've got some ideas for future episodes that I think are going to be fun as well. So one more episode of the Silent Christmas Carols. I'm not putting these through the adaptation meter, like I said last time. Obviously, the Charles Rock one would probably be the most faithful of what we've seen so far because he's walking with the ghosts. We meet the ghosts, but it's not really the same. And these are not going to be on my list of anything at the end. We'll talk about best Scrooges, best anything, best versions, ranking every version. These are much more of I view these more as documentary study of history more than me doing a review. I mean, I can talk about them obviously, and even when I do talk about the other films in the main series, I try to at least bring historical context and such. But I openly admit, hey, I'm bringing my personal preference in reviewing it. But with these, they're experiments up until a certain point, like I said, and the more recent ones, since being 1914 and on, yeah, you're still, I don't say like grading on a curve, but you're still kind of watching them as an artifact. So yeah, I don't think of them in the same conversation as the others. But yeah, also coming out around the same time as this episode should be my Patreon exclusive episode on Ghostbusters Christmas Carol, the real Ghostbusters animated series. Remember, if you join my Patreon for $5 a month, you can get a bonus episode about a TV show every month. Join for $10 a month, and you can even vote on which one I do next. So look out for that if you're on Patreon, and if you're not, I'd love if you sign up. But also, like I said, this podcast never behind a paywall, and only sign up if you can. Please, I don't want people spending money they don't have. Thank you for listening to Scrooge, a Christmas Carol podcast. Scrooge, a Christmas Carol podcast is written, hosted, and edited by Colin Murr. Theme music is Christmas Day by TRG Banks. The brief clip is from Scrooge 1970. You can help me out by leaving a comment on YouTube and liking and subscribing, as well as leaving a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. Additionally, you can donate to my Patreon, where you can receive bonus episodes, early episodes, and the right to vote in polls. Link is in the description. I'll be back next month with another episode of Scrooge, a Christmas Carol podcast. Until then, make sure to live in the past, the present, and the future, and ensure that the spirits of all three strive within you.